I'd like to talk about now is copper roofs, and I'll tell you several different stories, but they're all about copper roofs. One of the nicest projects I've ever worked on was the conservation of the south facade of the center block, the front facade of the center block. We did a lot of masonry conservation, but we also replaced the copper roof. Now this happened back in about 1996 or 7. And before we replaced it, the copper roof of the front of the center block was very much exactly the same as the copper roof on the west side, a lovely apple green color. But it had reached the end of its life cycle. The center block was constructed during the First World War, and during the war there was a shortage of experienced contractors. Most of the young men in those days were over in Europe fighting, and so there was a shortage of skilled labor in Canada. And when the copper roof of the center block was put on during the war years, the individual sheets of copper were solidly connected. They're soldered to adjacent sheets. And now a copper roof, you can imagine, in a very hot day like today, it can be 40 degrees, 50 degrees centigrade, the copper metal, if you touched it. And in the wintertime, it can be minus 40 or minus 50. So it has a tremendous temperature range. And metal, all metals, expand when it gets hot and contract when it gets cold. And so the copper roof over the years has pushed and twisted and so on. And there were a lot of tears and rips where the copper sheets were solidly and rigidly connected to each other. And so our project was to include the replacement of the green copper roof on the front, on the south facade of the center block. When a copper roof is first put on, it's bright and shiny, just like a new copper penny. The copper is quite thin. It comes in sheets and it's quite thin, and we measure the thickness of copper by how much a square foot of copper weighs. Now that particular copper that was used on the center block is what's called 16-ounce copper. That means if you cut a square foot of copper, 12 inches by 12 inches, and weighed it, it would be 16 ounces. And that's the normal kind of thickness of copper that would be used in a roofing project. And that's what we used. So initially it's bright and shiny, but that surface is unstable. It doesn't stay that way for long, and maybe 3-4 months, and then it turns brown, like the color of a milk chocolate bar, very lovely brown. And over the years it gets darker and darker, brown, still brown. Now that roof is about 10 years old now. We installed that in around 1996, 1997, and it's now 2007, so it's 9 or 10 years old now, and it's now a medium dark brown. It's fairly dark, and it'll continue getting darker until maybe it's 17, 18, maybe 20 years old. If I brought you here when it's 20 years old and showed you that roof and said, "Can you see green now happening in it?" I think you would say, "Yeah, I can kind of see green happening." And in fact, if you take a look at the Langevin building roof, now that Langevin roof was installed when I first came to Parliament Hill to work. So it would be today, my guess is about 19, maybe 18 years old. And on the west side, on the roof, on the brown copper roof, there are two little roofs. And they are starting to go green right now. I hope you can see that in the camera. After about 25 years to 30 years, everybody, like, I don't know if you can see green on those two little roofs now, but after it's 30 years old, definitely you can see it. In fact, most of the roof at that point will be green. And it stays green for the rest of its life. Now, this green is actually a corrosion product, and it's a very tough, durable green, and acts as a protection to the copper underneath. So it slows down the rate of corrosion on the bare metal underneath the green to an almost zero. And a copper roof in ideal conditions could go on for centuries, really. In the case of our center block roof, it was the workmanship during the war years that was really the problem there, and all the rips and tears. So it had reached the end of its life cycle, and so we had to replace it. What I'll tell you about is a story that was told to me when we were doing the South Façade project and replacing the roof. It's an old roofer's tale. Now, it was told to me not by an old roofer, but it's an old roofer's tale about how in the old days, back long before there were trucks and dump trucks and steam shovels well, there may have been steam shovels, but long before gasoline-powered construction equipment was on construction sites, there were a lot of horses. And so this is a story about how roofing contractors in the old days, back in the 1800s and maybe into the early 1900s, helped copper roofs to go green faster. And so I was walking down the central walkway with my roofing subcontractor, Doug his name was, and Doug said to me, "Don, you know in the old days they made copper roofs go green faster by putting horse urine on them." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Not just any old horse urine from a pregnant mare." Doug called it mare in foal. In other words, a mare with a foal, either pregnant or just having given birth to a foal. And they used to put, Doug said, horse urine on the bright shiny copper roofs to make them go green faster. So that's what they did in the old days.